Okay, thank you guys for coming back to listen to another episode. You can see us. You can see us. We are real, live, in living color. If you're listening, then pause this, go to YouTube, type in Purple Diary Podcast, and then you can see us because this is now a video podcast. Whoop whoop.
Yay.
Yay. I know, right? Let me introduce my guest. Justin Graves is a motivational speaker, um, an optimist, I would think. Are you an optimist?
I'd say so. I accept that.
Yeah. An overall just happy, pleasant person, the best person to be around, especially if you're in a bad mood or a good mood. Just a great individual. And I'm so excited because you were my first guest ever. And to have you back for episode 50, I didn't even know if I was going to make it to episode 50 at some times, but we are here and you're here. And I'm so excited. Thank you, Justin, for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And obviously, congratulations to you, Big
Thank you.
5-0. That is a
I
huge
know.
deal.
Thank
So,
you.
congrats on making it. That's incredible. The persistence, the dedication. I love it.
Thank you. It's so weird. I've seen a few people who started podcasts after I started mine. I'm not saying I'm the reason they started it, but just, they got
Mhm,
inspired by someone to start one and
mhm.
theirs don't exist anymore. And I'm like, I did it. I made it through I think something like at least 50%, but I feel like it's even more than that. A big chunk of
Mhm.
podcasts don't make it past 7 episodes.
I thought you were going to say three. Like, I was like, I feel like people love it for like the first one, of course, they have an idea. Second, and then third, they're like, oh, this is too much work. I can't do it. And then they drop.
Or they run all the ideas you think you have to talk about. You realize, oh, I really can't talk about that for that long.
Right.
That happened to
Right.
me. I had a whole list and I was like, oh, I can't. 30 minutes is longer than it seems.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Okay.
you made it.
I know, right? Yay. And thank you to everybody who's listened for this long. Appreciate you a lot. Okay, so for anybody who didn't hear the first episode, can you describe yourself a little bit? What do you do for work? What do you do for fun?
Absolutely. What do I do for work? What do I do for fun? My day job and my passion job is how I like to describe life, right? So, my day job, which I do enjoy, I don't want to give it any shade. I do like my day job. I work for the federal government, and my primary function is that I run an awards and recognition program. So, I get to give people money when they do a good job at work. So, it's actually a really sweet gig. I'm so grateful. I've got a wonderful team, a wonderful supervisor. And I've actually worked at DHS since I was 17 years old, which of course you know because you were
Yeah.
also an intern just like I was.
Hmm.
So yeah, DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, is my day job, and then my passion job is my own company actually. So He's on Wheels. I do motivational speaking. I run a blog and a pretty significant social media presence. And He's on Wheels is all about disability advocacy, social inclusion, and community engagement. So those three things are at the heart of He's on Wheels, and it is truly like my lifeblood. It's what motivates me. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning. Is promoting those things and helping people understand that disability, all people of all disabilities and abilities should be included, and that community is everything, no matter what kind of community it is, whether it's based on race, ability, sexuality, and gender. Community is everything to me. So yeah, through that company, I get to travel around and speak to different groups about all of that, and it's a blast. I love it.
Hmm. And for fun?
Oh yeah, that's right. And for fun, man. So cooking is probably my biggest hobby. I spend all of my free time in my kitchen, and I'm so grateful to be in a position where I have, a really solid kitchen, if I do say so myself. I have a lot of different cuisines that I like to make. My favorite dish probably to not even cook, but to assemble is pesto. Love a good fresh pesto, a little basil. You don't have to use pine nuts, people. You can use walnuts. They're much more affordable. Same flavor in pesto. And then so yeah, cooking. I love to learn about other cultures through cooking or through food, and so that leans into traveling. Love to travel. And if I'm not home, I'm probably on the road somewhere. If I'm not traveling to like a new state or a new country, then probably visiting friends, because quality time is my love language. And I love being able to connect with the people that I love. So yeah, traveling is everything to me. I kind of like living out of a suitcase every so often.
Yeah, you are a jet setter. You travel so, so much. I'm so jealous. You're always somewhere. Okay, so anybody who maybe didn't listen to the first episode that you were on, and or I mean, looking, if you're even watching the video, you probably can't tell. Justin uses a wheelchair, and can you explain like your medical conditions, like why you use a
Mhm.
wheelchair?
For sure. Yeah, yeah. My wheelchair, which one of my good friends lovely gave the lovely name Lil Chromio, is his name apparently. So you can't choose your own nickname. So that's what he was given. But yeah, I'm a paraplegic, which means I'm paralyzed from the waist down. And the reason for that is a really rare spinal inflammation called transverse myelitis. And that might sound complicated, but it's not that complicated. Transverse means across, and myelitis means, excuse me. Yeah, no, that's right. Transverse means across, like width, and myelitis means inflammation. So if you have osteomyelitis, that's inflammation of the bone. If you have anything myelitis, just means it's an inflammation basically. And so transverse myelitis is what I had when I was 3 years old. And it came out of nowhere. It was a sudden onset and very sudden diagnosis because I was at my babysitter's house one day, laid down for a nap, woke up from that nap, couldn't feel my legs. It was literally in a snap. And yeah, so that whole process was really interesting. Kind of thankfully, I don't have that much recollection of it, but I think all the time about how much it impacted my family. I've got two loving parents, my mom and my dad, who took such great care of me and advocated for me, and also taught me how to advocate for myself from a very young age. And then also my brother and sister, because it wasn't like, oh, you're paralyzed now, have fun. It was such a long process of rehab. Well, getting the diagnosis in the first place took a while, then rehab. So I'm sure that had a profound impact on my two siblings. So I'm often thinking about that, even in my current life, of how my illness played into like how it affected my family and my loved ones and those around me. But I'm grateful though, honestly. I always say that I gained my disability because using a wheelchair and having paralysis definitely, I don't think I would have picked it out of a lineup at the time as something that I would have loved to have happen to me. But the fact that it did, I've taken it, and it's part of my brand. It's the logo for my company, because it really is part of who I am now. And I mean that in the most positive way. Like, it's the reason I'm an advocate. It's the reason that I'm so outgoing. Having a disability really has been something that's changed my life, but not for the worse, definitely for the better.
Mhm. That's awesome. That's a very positive way to look at it. I'm sure it takes a while to get there. So,
Oh, yeah.
okay, I want to get a working definition of ableism to use for this episode. You don't have to, define it for the whole world, but just the way that we're going to look at it for the next hour ish. Can you give us a definition of ableism?
Yeah, for me, it's basically, and I love the way that you said it, like just for this space and this conversation, because it looks, ableism can be different all the time. And in fact, what I was just about to say was a little ableist. Ableism looks different all the time, and we can unpack that later on.
Hmm.
But for me, an ableism definition would be anything, any language, any perspective, any opinion, just any occurrence that centers and only centers the perspectives of those who are able bodied. Able bodied being those that have the use of all of their limbs and senses, is the way that I would define ableism.
Hmm. So does ableism, is there another part of ableism, I guess, that applies to people with like mental disabilities?
Absolutely. So, a good example of ableist language in this kind of situation is something that I actually still slip up and say from time to time. And I'll say it for the sake of this example, but I am actively eliminating it from my vocabulary. But it is like, oh my gosh, that was nuts, man. That was crazy. And those two terms, nuts and crazy, can be perceived as a slight to someone who might have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, anything, on that spectrum of, mental health issue. And I'm no mental health expert by any means, but I have attended many sessions and I've seen a lot of research around how those colloquialisms, as we'd call them, just, common figures of speech, don't mean any harm, but they're kind of in that area of microaggressions where you say something and it's not necessarily what you meant, but it can still be kind of harmful if you just say, oh, that's nuts. But, back in the day, people who were nuts were, cuckoo or crazy. And it was always a negative, pejorative kind of term.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm still working on that. I had a
Hmm.
therapist on the podcast a while back and I asked him about that. And, he said he's used the term "that's crazy" in sessions before. And that's just a way of speaking. I don't call people crazy, regardless of whether I know what, mental illnesses they might be dealing with. But that's gonna be a hard one for me
Yeah.
to
Oh,
eliminate.
I've been like aware of what I just shared for like 2 or 3 years. And I still, especially because when you're saying something like that, it's in a moment where you're excited, and
Hmm.
there's like things going on. You're like, oh my gosh, like, wow, that was wild. And that's actually my substitute is wild.
Mm.
So like my friends and, anyone I'm texting with, I'll say, oh, that's wild instead of that's nuts or that's crazy, just because it's a little less, opportunity for it to be taken like in a bad or maybe ableist way.
Okay, good point. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay, do you think the disabled community gets enough representation in mainstream media, on television and film, and even on social media?
Not enough. No. The short answer is no. And, I hate to be like overly positive, but, it is increasing and it is increasing like rapidly in real time. I did not personally watch a lot of the Olympics. As we're having this conversation, it's like maybe 3 or 4 days after the 2020 Olympics ended here in 2021.
Right.
And so many ads that I saw, especially Toyota was one that jumped out at me, included athletes with disabilities. And a lot of them weren't even necessarily for the Paralympics. They were, mainstream, as we call them, advertisements. And I was really struck by that in a positive way, obviously, because, the old saying that, oh, I want to see someone that looks like me. We use that a lot in the Black community, but that's not anything that I would even come close to expecting as someone with a disability. My whole 30 years I've been on this earth, I can name on one hand the number of characters I've seen in a movie or a sitcom or whatever of someone using a wheelchair the same way that I do. But even just to name a couple off the top of my head right now, there was a show on what was used to be like ABC Family called Switched at Birth. There
I
was a
remember that show.
character, yeah, a character, a wheelchair user in that show. There's that one Kevin Hart movie where he he's like a caregiver. I don't watch movies, so I haven't seen it. But Kevin Hart
Me
and
neither. So neither
right, I
one of
remember
us
that.
know.
Yep, yep. We're always like, you seen that movie? Nope.
Haven't seen
But
it.
he's a care. Yeah, he's a caregiver to I can't remember the other character's name. He's a white male. But yeah, those are just two examples that come off the top of my head of characters who do have some kind of disability or wheelchair users. But there's also a show that I'm absolutely obsessed with, which are words you never come out of my mouth because I don't watch a lot of TV. But on Netflix, it's called Atypical,
Mm.
and the show is all about a student who is neurologically atypical because he has autism. And so it follows his entire family. And there are some characters who are wheelchair users on that show. And also, while the main character is not autistic, there are several actors with autism on the show. So very inclusive in that way. And I think it's great. So it's increasing, but can definitely still increase more for sure. If we're going to talk about, media being an accurate representation of the real world.
Absolutely. When I thought of it, I thought of, did you watch Glee?
No, but I do remember there being a character. I remember like seeing in like a music video or something in a
Right. And
wheelchair.
then yeah, but he didn't really use one. It was just for the show and I'm like, "Huh. Like what is the point then? If I mean, he was a good singer, but he was not like Beyonce. Like they could have found someone who really needed a wheelchair that could
Hmm.
sing. And I mean, I appreciate that they were trying to represent, but I feel like in this day and age, we're getting to the point where who you are in real life does matter. And
Oh
so
yeah.
different, like a lot of people who weren't black used to get away with playing black because they just looked the part. And now it matters. Like
Yup.
if you're not black, you don't get to play us. Or I think a
Yup.
lot of like Spanish or not Spanish, Latino people, on
Hmm.
TV were actually white, and that doesn't work anymore. And same
Yup.
thing with disabled people. I feel like they should get to play themselves. Y'all should get to play yourselves.
1,000%. And when you started saying that, even before you said the blackface part, that's exactly what I started thinking. And, all of these isms that we're facing with like today in society, racism, obviously, I think, kind of, started way back in, the early 1900s. That's when, Black people were beginning to build a voice, not had, but, thanks to all of the amazing civil rights leaders, Black folks were beginning to build that voice. And I think now we're getting to a point where, with like Me Too, for example, and women building that, well, people of all, gender identities building that voice to come out against sexual harassment. I think that it's a lot of the same with with other isms as well. So I think we're going to eventually get to a point where people with disabilities will hopefully have that, moment of reckoning and get that shine. And there will be hopefully a push that, hey, yeah, there are enough actors out there that we can find someone who truly has a disability to play this role of a character with a disability. And I can't wait for that moment because go figure, representation should be accurate. What a concept.
Yeah. um All right. So I think anybody who listens to this, I feel like should be familiar with the idea of microaggressions. And we hear about them a lot in the context of Black people. But I don't think we, as a whole, are really aware of what ableist microaggressions look or sound like. Can you give some examples of things that people might not even know that they're doing that are microaggressions?
Easy. Happens to me every day. So let's start with um, if you are writing an email for work or you're having a conversation in a professional setting. Oh, let me show you an example. Let me walk you through this. What
Mm.
if the subject can't walk? Um, One of the most glaring ableist microaggressions that frustrate me kind of the most is when you're in a public place. Let's say there's some kind of speaker at maybe a conference, and someone says, "Oh, I just hate using a microphone. Can you guys all hear me in the back? Is this good?"
Yeah.
you are now placing the responsibility on the person maybe in the second row who might have a hearing impairment to out themselves as having a disability just because of your alleged preference of not liking a microphone. So I always encourage folks to use whatever amplification device is available, regardless of your preference. And if your preference is that you don't like microphones, well, then don't present. You shouldn't have to put the onus on an audience member to have the same experience as everyone else just because of your preference. Um, and obviously, I'm a professional speaker, so I don't understand why anyone would have an issue with a microphone, anyways. But I'm biased. Let's see some other ones. Um, Gosh, these usually come to me so quickly. Um,
The blind leading the blind is one that I had never thought about. I saw a
there you
video
go.
of blind people talking about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, it does imply that being blind means you're stupid.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
which
That's
is
actually one
crazy.
that I haven't really like thought of off from day to day, but you're exactly right. That's yeah, like a pejorative. And it's so wild, wild the underlying assumption of a lot of things like that, where you're basically just saying something that's again a colloquialism and it's maybe second nature to you, but it's not something that should just be thrown around so easily because it can be really harmful. Um, Fallen on deaf ears is another one that I hear people say a lot. I think that that's obviously quite ableist to those who are hearing impaired or deaf. And also, one thing that I'm really passionate about is person first language in general. So instead of saying a disabled people, to say a person with a disability. For me personally, um, and and let me preface this by saying a lot of these things around language and ableism are also very specific to a particular person. So, if someone listening to or watching this has a loved one in their life with a disability and they're like, oh my gosh, am I offending them by saying, oh, do you want to run to the grocery store with me real quick? But they use a wheelchair. I'm not telling you that that means that that person is offended. I'm just saying that maybe be more conscious of it and ask them if it offends them. Let's communicate. Because for someone like me, no, it's not going to offend me. With my good friends, I'll often make a joke out of it and I'll say, oh, yeah, I'll roll to the grocery store with you. But that's just me gently reminding them of maybe any other ableist thing that they might say. It might not be about that moment, but about any other thing that just rolls off their tongue that is, kind of subconscious.
Yeah. I did not think about that. Run to the grocery store, or just how much our language doesn't even think about people with disabilities.
Hmm.
Huh. That's really, really
Yeah,
good.
and it's for me, it's especially with ableism, especially a lot of the research I do right now is all about ableism, and in relation to that, I strongly believe in the idea of calling someone in as opposed to calling someone out. Because if I was just rolling around, not walking, I was just rolling around, hammering it over people's heads like, don't say this, don't say that. That is not a catalyst for change. That's not a motivator for change in any way. That's just going to make people get defensive. And rightfully so. That's a very aggressive tactic. And so instead, I prefer to call people in and say, hey, have you considered using this language instead for all of the reasons that we just discussed? It's 100% more inclusive. And when I have a friend who's talking to me and says, like I have one really good friend, his name's also Justin, and
Hmm.
he'll literally text me and be like, oh, can I call you to roll through something real quick? And he wants to review something with me. He would probably just say, oh, let me walk through something with you. But he's just showing me and demonstrating with his language that he took that extra second to think about it and be thoughtful. And that makes me feel seen, which I'm still working on a less ableist alternative to that saying.
Oh,
Crazy, right?
you're right. Yeah.
Right? And again, in the Black community, we use that term all of the time. I want to feel seen. I want to feel heard. I want to feel, and again, it's not on its face bad because we all know what that means. We want to feel connected. We want to feel recognized. And there is no shade at wanting to feel those feelings. It's human nature. But I am always thinking about, how is me saying, I want to feel seen, potentially, negatively impacting someone who might have a vision impairment? And how might that make them feel excluded? Because frankly, I work with and interact with a lot of folks who are blind or vision impaired. So yeah, I'm just always thinking about that in the back of my mind, and how I can come up with more, active, like less ableist alternatives to a lot of the things that we say every day. Because I don't want to criticize someone and then not give them an alternative. Like that's not productive, not as productive.
Right, exactly. Another thing, I think the video with the blind people came up on my Instagram. And another thing they were talking about was, please don't just ask me how I became blind. Like, I think for people with physical disabilities, people always want to know, like, what happened? Did you get in a car accident?
Mm-hmm,
Did you fall
mm-hmm,
off a ladder? Like, what was the situation? Not thinking about
mm-hmm.
how that might be really traumatic for somebody to have to recount probably almost every day what happened to them and why they have the disability that we can see. Um,
Yep.
so do you agree that
Yeah.
it's insensitive to ask?
100%, 100%. And it's funny because going back to what I said about like it's based on individual people and their preferences, for me personally, I don't really get that offended. But it's based on two factors. Again, for me personally, I'm speaking with I statements here. On one point, I do get annoyed if it's a complete bona fide stranger walking up to me in the grocery store. Hey, so what happened? I get that more often than you would think. And no, not
Wow.
a hello, not a, oh, can I help you reach that bag of chips on the top shelf? Just a, usually a male. Hey man, hey, what happened? Like,
I'm
excuse me?
sorry. You-
With that tone and everything. Like, I'm not even trying to be funny. Like, that's it. So a complete stranger, I think that's completely out of line. I don't know you. I don't understand or even want to understand your motive. I think that's just actually really disrespectful. It's none of your business at that point. Now on the flip side, if it's someone who I'm in a shared environment with, let's say, maybe um, we've been at a party and we've been hanging, we did just meet, but we've been hanging out around, 2, 3 hours. And, we've chatted about things, we've gotten to know each other a little bit, a gentle, like, frankly, hey, do you mind if I ask, I see you're using a wheelchair. Do you mind if I ask how come? Because that, frankly, is a yes or no question. Do I mind? I can tell you either yes or no, right? It's not a what happened to you. It's a do you mind if I ask? Which I think is a much more fair question. And at the end of the day, I would prefer that someone ask me the question rather than stare and wonder. And I've got tough skin. I get stared at all the time, day in and day out. I'm very used to it. It doesn't bother me at all. At the same time, I would rather that conversation take place and it be a learning opportunity for that person than for them to just stare like a rude person. But again, all of that being my perspective, by and large, most of my peers who also have disabilities definitely get offended because more times than not, it's due to exactly what you said, Danielle. It's a rehashing of trauma because it's a car accident. It's falling off of a ladder. It's I dove into and I should say trigger warning here. Apologies, I didn't say that before. And so I'll stop listing, but some kind of traumatic event that led to their disability. And when you ask that question, it immediately takes you back to that place. Lucky for me, I was 3 years old when I became paralyzed. I remember very little. It wasn't a traumatic accident, but for a lot of people, it's not that way. It's maybe they were 25, and again, trigger warning with what I'm about to say. They dove into the shallow, a sand dune in the ocean, and then they became paralyzed. And now their two legs that they define themselves by being able to run and jump is taken away from them. No, don't ask me why I got paralyzed. I'm saying hypothetically as that person, you know? So yeah, I always recommend to folks tread cautiously, but the root of that answer is communication. Ask the question, is it okay if I ask you what happened? Because if I'm, the 25-year-old, one who got paralyzed in the ocean, my answer is no, no, you may not ask. But someone like me who's an advocate doesn't mind talking about it, I'll usually say yes, as long as you come correct.
Hmm. And maybe have more of a conversation. Like that probably shouldn't be, "Hi, I'm Danielle, nice to meet you. Why are you using a wheelchair?" Like that. Get into the conversation first,
That's
maybe.
right. That's exactly right.
So how do oh, I want to get you mid scoop. But how do ableism and racism intersect in your life?
So racism and ableism really are so similar in my eyes because, and then the reason I say that is that a person, if they are sighted, they will look at you and judge you for either of those characteristics. The color of your skin, oh, then they're automatically, oh, look at this black person and draw whatever conclusions they have about black people. Same with me sitting on top of four wheels. Look at me, see that I have a disability, and draw whatever conclusions they have about the fact, or about draw whatever conclusions they have about people with disabilities. Now, I actually kind of, to answer this question, I want to tell a little story because, and I think I honestly might have shared the same exact story on the first interview that we did for the
Hmm.
first episode. But regardless, it's one of my favorites to illustrate this exact point. So I was in college, and one summer I was a camp counselor at a camp for students with disabilities. And one of the students that I was closest with happened to have a vision impairment. He was blind. And one day we were going to the dining hall on the campus we were staying at, and everyone was getting their lunch. And that student was with someone else who, and it's buffet style. So the student did need, a good deal of assistance and accommodation to pick out what he wanted for lunch. So we all get our food. I'm on my own, doing my own thing, got my food in my lap, and we all get to the table around the same time. And so we get to the table, and another person at the table, I think it was a staff member also from the camp, without asking, moves one of the chairs so that I can just roll in with my wheelchair. And then, so we're all sitting down, we start having conversation, we're merry, we're eating. And then at some point, a fourth person at the table says something about the fact that I am a black and that I use a wheelchair. And it wasn't anything like negative or like attacking. And I am pretty sure the person who's saying this was black. But yeah, I can't remember the exact comment, but I remember the student's name was Nathan, the student who had the vision impairment. I remember Nathan's response clearly, even though I can't remember what the remark was. And his response was, "Okay, guys, that's nothing to joke about." And I was like, "What, Nathan? What are you talking about?" And he was like, "Well, Justin, I know you use a wheelchair because everyone moves when you come around. Like they start, like I could tell that, Danielle moved that chair for you when you got here and you just rolled in. So like I knew you were in a wheelchair, even though I can't see you. But when I use your arm, when you help, when you give me your arm to help me guide around, your skin doesn't feel black. Your voice doesn't sound black. Like there's no reason that we should joke about you being black."
What? What?
I kid you
What does
not.
black
And
skin feel like?
let's
Smooth,
go.
soft, buttery?
Right.
But
Thank
either
you.
way.
Mine does at least. I'm
That's
moisturized.
crazy.
I
Oh,
kid you
whoops.
not.
Oh my God, that's
Sure.
wild.
Safe space. Safe space. Safe space. We're learning. But no,
Wow.
you're exactly right. And so I unpacked that with him. I was like, well, Nathan, like, we're not joking. Like, sure, I don't know what you meant by all of that, but no, I really am Black. And he was so surprised. And so that student, again, we were already close. He apologized. He was like, I didn't mean anything by it. But that just goes to show the way that our world concept is built. No child is born being racist. No child is born being ableist. These are all social things that are built and developed and created because of other people, because of whoever painted the normal, the average, the typical, for whatever reason, those things that shy away from that, people think it's important for it to be the average thing. And at the end of the day, racism and ableism, for me, they intersect in a way that is usually, they're not always at the same time. Because in a lot of spaces where I experience ableism, racism hasn't come into play yet. It's usually something where I can't get into a restaurant because they might not have an elevator, or I can't attend a certain event because there is no accessible seating. And a lot of those things take place before my race even comes into factor. But then on the flip side, the racism piece, I'm often affected by my skin color in terms of when I enter a room and people I experience this the most at networking events, where people often want to, naturally, I guess, cluster off into their own kind of groups and inner circles. But by and large, I'm going to automatically feel comfortable, going to that group full of Black people that look like me. But I also love to interact with everyone. I'm not the kind of person that's going to gravitate towards the Black people and then just stay with the Black people. I want to pop around, get a little vibe of everything. And I feel like racism comes into play in those environments because it's like, oh no, we saw you over there interacting with those folks who are not interacting with us. So now there's some, like exclusion, elbows out, keep you out of our circle kind of vibe. So yeah, I can't think of a time where I've experienced them both together in a really aggressive way, but I always, always, always experience them, one or the other, literally every day of my life. But at the end of the day, the ableism piece is, I think, the one that I experience most often. And I say that frankly, with a lot of privilege, because, I was grateful to receive education. I've got two parents who helped me pay my way through school. I did not pay for all of that, to be clear. I got a master's degree, I got a graduate degree, and some of those things give you access to things that race might otherwise, preclude you from or exclude you from. So super grateful for that. I give so much gratitude to my parents, and also just to the environment that I was born into, in terms of socioeconomics. Like, people, I think, don't look at education as a privilege. They don't look at having two parents in the home as a privilege, which I also do. And so for all of those reasons, the ableism piece, I think I have like a stronger attachment to, because some of the race things, I feel like I've kind of like shortcutted my way around. But at the end of the day, there are two things about me that will never change. The fact that I will always need a wheelchair to get around, and my skin will always be Black. And people often ask me if I would change the wheelchair one. No, I would never change either, ever. Even if I had like, a magic bullet and they said, oh, Justin, we could give you this and you could walk tomorrow, I would say no, thank you. Because both of those, my Blackness and my disability are so much a part of who I am.
Wow. That's incredible. And that sounds like a lot to deal with, to have both of those things impact your life every day because of the ignorance of other people, really. And people
Oh,
from
yeah.
both of the groups are probably ignorant about the other group. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. 100%.
All right. I feel
Cool.
like we should acknowledge we had to take a little
Yeah.
break,
Yeah.
because Justin is an actual superhero, such a professional, just so great. I'm so grateful because you paused the interview to get your medication to get an IV. So you are doing the rest of this with an IV in your arm. That is crazy. Oh my God. I'm sorry. It's not
It's okay. No,
crazy.
do not apologize to me. Just make a bookmark and think of the alternative and keep it rolling.
I know. Okay. That's going to
But
be
yeah,
so
I am
difficult.
unfortunately in the hospital as we do our interview here, but it's all good. We're getting healthy, so that's what
Yeah.
counts.
But you look great. The lighting is
Thanks.
wonderful.
Good. One more piece, as I'm thinking about the intersection of like racism and ableism, is I just think back to when I was in grade school, like elementary school, middle school, being out on the playground and just even in the lunchroom and stuff. Everything's so social, and I just remember, frankly, like it was almost always the students who were Black that were not friendly to me. And I did not process this in any way when I was a kid. It honestly probably wasn't until grad school. I literally read a book called "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" And I was like, "Wait, what?" And I read that book, and then even a couple of years after that, I started thinking about it in relation to my own life, and I was like, "Wow, maybe this is where some of my like resentment honestly comes from because, growing up, I was almost always closer friends with students who were Asian and students who were Caucasian. And for some reason, I was like, is there something wrong with me? Like, I don't have any Black friends. As they say, I don't have any friends figuratively that look like me. Right. So I was like, what is wrong with me in this situation? And I wrestled with that for a while, but at the end of the day, I still don't have any kind of like solution for it or really exactly know why. But in my heart, I really do feel like it was because of a lack of acceptance of my disability. And that's something that even now growing up, as a 30-year-old adult, when I'm in a grocery store and I'm getting stares from little kids specifically, because they used to be the ones that stared the most. Unfortunately, older people apparently are also not house trained anymore. But little kids of color are often the ones who stare the most. And then also my favorite thing though is that kids of color are also the ones who are more likely to ask the question. And be like, sir, what happened? And because I do get that. Like you might be surprised that like a kid would speak up to a complete stranger. But usually when a child smiles at me, I smile back. Or when they stare at me, I smile back. Because I want them to have a positive experience with me as someone who is a man of color, as a wheelchair user. And so yeah, that I still have some like I'm kind of thinking out loud here.
Mhm.
Feel like it's like a therapy session for a podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just something that I thought of, as we're talking about ableism and racism together.
hmm It's, I would imagine it has to be so difficult to navigate both groups. I mean, being Black and a woman, I feel like, and not so much having to tone down being a woman around Black people, unless you're around a bunch of men, which
Hmm.
I try to never do. I just find
Right.
men mostly uninteresting, but around not even just white women, but like women who are not Black, I'm like, this, it just feels like there's a disconnect, and I can kind of relate to feeling
Yeah.
like there's a issue here. I'm not
Right.
100% all in either group sometimes.
Yeah. And it's something in the air and you can't quite put your finger on it, but
Hmm
it's there.
Right.
Yep.
So I want to talk about dating. I know that you
Yeah.
used to be kind of like a serial monogamist. And I'm
Yeah.
curious, as a 30-year-old man, as a 30-year-old black man, 30-year-old black
Mhm.
man who uses a wheelchair, how,
Mhm.
what is dating like for you? And what do you think a partner, a potential partner, what qualities would they need to have to be with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So dating is a mixed bag for me. That's for darn sure. You know, in 2021, of course, I feel like it's all about the apps, you know, so the Bumble, the Tinder, the Hinge. And I also use like some apps that are kind of off the beaten path. One of my favorites right now is called Field, Feeld is how it's spelled. And there's a really large population of like polyamorous and also transgender folks on there. And I'm not into like the poly side of things necessarily. Like that's not something, you know, that I would consider myself to be into actively. But I have been intimate and involved with trans folks in my past. So I think like sexually, I would define myself as pansexual because I don't really, you know, have, you know, a strong preference in terms of gender identity when I'm looking for a particular or for a potential partner. And for those who might not be aware, pansexual for me is defined as, you know, being attracted primarily to the person's personality. So their gender identity, their genitalia does not matter to me. For me, it's more about developing some kind of connection to their person as a whole, and then the romantic connection is able to follow from there if it's there. And so that's really important to me. And honestly, I've got to be honest, the person that I was most recently like involved with, I wouldn't call it a relationship, it was probably more of a situationship. Was a trans person. And what I've found with so many of my friends who are trans and partners is that they understand the all of the pieces that come along with being othered in society the same way that I do as a person with a disability. So when it comes to dating someone else who understands being othered, when you don't have to explain yourself as much, it kind of reminds me of what people say about being Black and dating another person who is also Black, because there's so much less that you have to explain to that person. I've never had that luxury. I've actually never dated a person, male, female, trans, any
Yeah.
other identity that is just 100% Black. Yeah. Is that kind of wild? Not crazy, but
Yeah.
wild.
It's very wild.
Yeah.
I'm
And
shocked by that.
for what'd you say?
I said I'm shocked by that.
Yeah, and it's not, you know, an attraction thing. Although again, since we're friends here and it's a safe space, growing up, going back to what I said about feeling othered, you know, by the other Black kids, that definitely kind of developed my sense of attraction and who I was attracted to at that time. And I dated one girl who was half Black, half white. But when it comes to race, it's actually never been something that I've strongly considered in terms of my sense of attraction. Even from a young age, it was like I think I was attracted to girls only at that time because society, right?
Hmm.
And that's the norm that you are taught. But now that I'm older, gosh, yeah, attraction when it comes to race, I ranges everywhere. Asian, Caucasian, you know, African American, African, period. You know, truly any race or ethnicity. But at the end of the day, attraction for me is so much more about what's inside than what's on the outside. Like that's probably the ultimate statement. And then when it comes to, you know, what I would look for in a partner, number one is consistency. That is what I actively seek in a partner, is someone who is just reliable, consistent, and, you know, does what they say they're going to do. Because I know that I'm guilty of having very high expectations of myself and of other people. And the closer I get to someone, the higher my expectations get. And I've had to come to terms with that, especially as I get older, because like you said, I've kind of been a serial monogamist. And I also believe in the idea of keeping it private until it's permanent. So I'm not very public about like, you know, any situationships that I might have. But at the end of the day, all of my relationships, like since I was, you know, like 25 or 26, when they ended, it was in some way due to a lack of consistency. And then also lack of communication. So that's kind of a backdoor answer to the question too of what's important to me. Open communication is so important. As you can tell, I'm a speaker, I'm a communicator, and that is so required for me because I want to. I'm an emotional person too, and I like to deal with emotions. No one would ever accuse me of being like emotionally shut off or emotionally unavailable, because I love connection, and to have connection, you need emotion and communication, so yeah, consistency, communication, those would probably be the two biggest things for me.
Yeah, that's great. And it's good you
What would
know
your
what
answer
you
to that
need.
be? Yeah, and it's kind of made
um,
me like a cheat because you're already engaged and everything, which congratulations again, by the way.
thank you. Well, don't look at my nails. I need to get them done. But um, when we first started dating, I asked Desmond, my fiance, what are your things? Like, what things do you need? And I was like, well, let me tell you mine first. Um, I really I need a stimulation. I need to do new things. I don't want to be the couple that's like going to the same restaurants, going to the same vacation spots every year. Like, we
Hmm.
need to do new things and we can have our favorite places. I'm not saying we can never repeat a restaurant ever or something like that,
Right,
but I want
right.
to do new things and I need you to find them sometimes. I mean, I'll help find them too, but like we just went to Miami. We had so many new things that we got to do.
That looked
And
incredible, by the way.
yeah, it was so fun. And it just meant even more that like he planned them and he knew what I would want to do and what he would want to do. I assume he enjoyed them, but it was really nice. Um, I really need open communication as well. That's a big thing to me, and I think good communication is different for every couple. If you start dating a new person, what was good communication in your last relationship will be completely different for this one, and just figuring out how we do it, but definitely voicing like I really don't like that or I really do. I Words of affirmation and quality time are my love languages and I like compliments and I want to hear when you really like something so that I can keep doing it, or when you don't so that I can stop. And the last thing was just understanding, like leaning in. And now that we're about to get married, I think for me, that really means just remembering we're on the same side. Like the arguments have to be from the place of we both want the same thing. We have different ideas about how to achieve that thing, but we're not butting heads. We are trying to work together towards the solution versus feeling like it's his side and my side. We're on the same side, and our team is trying to figure out how to get the solution that we want.
One team, one dream, I always like to say. I stole that from somebody, I'm not sure, but credit to that person. But one team, one dream.
Right.
I
I
love
like
that.
that. And yeah, those are probably my biggest things. That's what I said at the beginning. Assume they'll probably change, especially years from now when we have children.
Sure.
But those are
Yeah.
my biggest ones for now. Yeah. Okay. Couple more. We're almost done. What are three things that people can do right now to combat ableism? When they turn this off, what can they start doing immediately?
My favorite recommendation is to go to Instagram and follow accounts that talk about disability and ableism. One of my favorites is Diversability on Instagram. And gosh, I've got to be also honest, I haven't been on Instagram much in the past like 4 or 5 months.
You
So
haven't. You've been so quiet.
I've been so quiet. Yeah. Like I pop in, I'll post like a quick story or repost a couple stories, and then I'll pop right back out. Hopefully nobody saw me. Um, but yeah, Diversability is great. Disability Insight is another good one. The Instagram for AAPD, I do not know their actual handle, but if their website, I believe, is aapd.org. It is the Association for Americans with People with Disabilities. They run a great Instagram, and they actually repost a lot of the content from places like Disability Insight, Diversibility, things like that. So having it in your feed, if you are an Instagram user, and just being open to it and introduced to it, and they'll post a lot of things like, today's ableist microaggression, right?
Mm.
So having that just top of your mind because you're already scrolling your feed, you are, that is definitely a helpful way to kind of get your brain thinking about anti-ableism. Second, I would recommend, honestly, if you're into books, even if you're not into books, audiobooks are great. But Alice Wong just put out a really, really good book called Disability Visibility. So it is a book of narratives of people with disabilities. And so just to give you some awareness, and whether you have a disability or if you're able-bodied, I think it's a great read to give folks more awareness around the issues that come up for people with disabilities. And then number three, I would say just communicate. If you have someone, a loved one in your life with a disability, reach out to them, and then in turn listen to them, because that's one of my biggest personal frustrations is, I've got an amazing tribe, like I love my friends, my family. I've got an amazing network around me, and oftentimes I think my friends, especially my friends, think of it as like a joke or a term of endearment when they're like, oh my gosh, Justin, like I completely forget that you use a wheelchair. And on the surface, that's kind of, it's in a way, it's flattering a little bit, because that means that I am behaving in a way that's encouraging you to look past my disability. At the same time, my disability is a really big part of me. And so if you are, forgetting that I use a wheelchair, then that also might mean that you are forgetting that the restaurant we go to tonight needs to have an elevator.
Right.
And that's so crucially important to me having a positive experience. So, and then I'll finish this answer by just a quick anecdote. I think my heart gets like most warm, especially with relation to my friends, when we're going somewhere and they've already, what I call it casing the place. So they've already called ahead and said, "Hey, I see our reservations on the third floor. Do you guys have an elevator? Are your restrooms accessible?" And it might be surprising to hear that a friend, like not a girlfriend, not a boyfriend, not a significant other, not a parent, not a sibling, like a friend would do that. And several of my friends over the years have done that. And it just makes me so happy because that's my everyday. That is what I do every single time I think about getting up and going somewhere. And to have that responsibility taken off of my shoulders, like I'm getting a little emotional now just thinking about it. Like it's a little thing, but it goes such a long way. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you have someone in your life with a disability, like next time you're planning something with them or for them, do that. Like say, hey, I was wondering if you wanted to go to this restaurant. I know you love this food. Oh, and by the way, I called ahead and I know they've got an accessible restroom, so you don't have to worry about it.
Hmm.
And yeah, it makes me so so happy because that extra piece of being that thoughtful, it's rare. Frankly, it's rare. So yeah, those are probably my top three.
That's awesome. Just when you mentioned your friend saying that they forgot that you use a wheelchair, to me that sounds a lot like I had a coworker once when I was at JMU, which is in a very white area, and
Yep.
I was working at a restaurant, I was a server, I was the only black person who was a server, and one of my coworkers was like, you're basically white. And I was like, no, I'm not. That's not a compliment.
No, I am not.
And he was like, well, no, you're taking it the wrong way. I just meant like you're not a stereotype. And I'm like, you could have kept that thought to yourself. You could have said that when I left.
Stop talking, sir.
Right. But saying that you don't notice my blackness just because you find me to be a pleasant person to be around is it's wild and
That is what
weird as
I
hell.
call a macro aggression. As a term, I don't know if that's a real term, but as opposed to like a micro, small aggression, that is a macro aggression. That is
Right.
wild.
Yeah. And everybody, because it was a bar. Like we were all sitting at the bar and everybody was like, no, 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 you're just taking it the wrong way. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm black. And you can just say that you like me and not that you think I'm not black because you find me pleasant to be around. That is crazy.
Hmm.
Moving
That's
on.
people. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Moving on. Yikes.
So the book recommendation that you gave, is that your one or do you want to give more?
Ooh. Let's see. I would like to give some more.
Okay, great.
um, Another one that's top of mind is Blind Spot. Cannot remember the author, but it's called Blind Spot: The Hidden Biases of Good People. It's got a green cover on it. Great book that has really given me some tools to give people a lot more grace and patience as I continue doing the work I do on ableism. So it's basically just talking about, kind of like our innate, ingrained mental, like psychological blind spots that we have.
Yeah.
That's a really good one, especially for anyone who's listening to this that might be doing work in on any kind of ism, racism, sexism, ableism, list goes on. And I would also recommend, and I'll be frank, I'm gonna not really sell this that well, but it's an incredible book. It's called A Disability History of the United States.
Hmm.
Again, can't remember the author, but this book is part of a greater collection of books that is a blank history of the United States. I've
Hmm.
also read an Indigenous people's history, and I've also read a Black woman's history. I've read a disability history, and I'm actually next going to work on a queer history of the United States. So they're all part of that same series. I think they were kind of written for like introductory, like college level course on each of those topics. But so it's not like super textbooky, but it does give you a lot of context and a lot of background to the plights and the development of all of those individual groups through the lens of the United States of America. So especially a Black woman's history. Oh my goodness. Like, gotta recommend that one. That one's probably been my favorite so far. Like, even I know we've talked about like ableism and disability a lot, but
Hmm.
a Black woman's history has probably been my favorite out of that group. And then the last recommendation I'll give is for one that I haven't finished yet, but I'm almost there. It's called Together. Loneliness, and the subtitle is like loneliness in a something world. But the author of that book is Vivek Murthy, and he is the current Surgeon General of the United States. Was previously Surgeon General under President Obama as well. And the book actually came out during the current pandemic that we're in. So it's really interesting, in terms of Zoom and being connected. I'm using air quotes right now, connected through Zoom. And just, how lonely a lot of people feel right now. So I think that book is also a really good one. And let me finish my book recommendations by saying I have not read any of these. I listened to all of them. Audio
Same
books
thing.
are my preference for sure. I just don't have the attention span to read. I get sleepy and bored, but I do love a good audio book. And then I'll buy the book and I'll follow along, and take
Mhm.
notes on interesting things, but I don't always like flip through the pages. But yeah,
Yeah,
team
that's
audiobook all the
fine.
way.
Yeah, that's a valid way to consume your books. I feel like it gets more
Yeah.
people into books, and so that's cool. I'm not a physical book person who like shits on audiobook people.
Right.
Like those are still real books. They're not for me though. Like I
Sure.
listening to I'm a podcast listener and I will like zone out, fall asleep, and I'm the opposite. Like how you are with physical books, like you zone out or like can't pay attention. That's how I am with listening to anything. So okay. I tried to go back and listen to our first conversation, episode 2 of the podcast, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to do it because I was like, oh my God, I sound terrible. My interview skills are probably so trash. I couldn't do it. So I wanted to go back and listen to what you're, I don't want to hear it. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist. um,
That's hilarious.
I I didn't get to hear, well, I didn't get to listen back and be reminded of what your dream for your life's work was back then, almost 2 years ago. So, do you have a new dream if you even remember the first one?
That's embarrassing that I listened to our episode again this morning, just, to remember what we talked about, and I forgot my answer still. Um, so I'll just say whether old new, I don't know, but my current dream for my life's work, frankly, is to leave a legacy. One of my favorite quotes is from Lin-Manuel Miranda's musical Hamilton. And towards the end, when Alexander Hamilton's about to die, Lynn or Alexander says, legacy, legacy. What is a legacy? It's planting seeds in a garden you may never get to see. And I just think that, especially, we didn't get too much into like health stuff in today's conversation, but like you mentioned, I am in the hospital. So, my health and frankly, mortality, I'm not dying. let me say that. But of course, you have health issues that pop up. We all do. And it just makes you think maybe a little bit more of mortality than you would otherwise, and how important life and living life is when you're able. And so I've always been very focused on leaving a positive legacy. If I'm ever not around, I want someone to look back and be like, yeah, that Justin Graves kid, like he did some impactful, positive things. And those things, I'm using air quotes, I want to be in the area of disability advocacy and, being a name, that 50 years from now, when they're thinking about, how much progress has been made since the ADA when it was signed in 1990. I want it to be like, oh yeah, and then Justin Graves came along and, did this thing or helped pass this thing. I want to just leave a really solid legacy, given the cards that I'm dealt. Like I truly think that I was, in a way, chosen to live my life in a wheelchair. I'm grateful for the mental health and the stamina with which I'm able to do it. And I want to be able to use that to be, in hindsight, look back and be able to say, yeah, I used my situation and my platform in a positive way. And then therefore the people that have come after me are also positively affected by that legacy. So yeah, that really is my dream, through He's on Wheels, through meeting one new person every day, and that goal of mine, through even the work that I do with my day job. Like I want to leave a positive legacy, regardless of whether or not I personally, get to gain anything from it. But the gain for me is really just leaving that behind and being happy with what I've done.
Mhm. Well, that's an incredible dream, one that you're already accomplishing, which is so interesting. So many times that people share what their dream is, and I'm like, wow, you're really doing it. Like, if you died a year from, not you specifically, but like, if you died a year from now, people would say that you were doing that. So, good job. And
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. Well, oh my God, we did it. Thank you so much, Justin, for coming
Episode
back.
50.
I know. I'm doing 50 more and then I'm stopping. but, but
That's That's totally fair. It's such a big undertaking. And let me say, Danielle, on the public flipping record, I am so proud. Like I don't feel like a proud parent or anything because I'm not your papa. But it's just like, obviously, I don't know how many people that are listening to this may or may not know this, but Danielle and I met because of an internship where she interned. I was also an intern at that same place at one point, and then I worked there. And Danielle, I'm using air quotes, quote, worked for me. She didn't work for me. She did her own thing. But Danielle, we obviously met when we were much younger than we are now. And I remember when you said, "Oh, I'm thinking about starting a podcast." Everyone says that. Everyone says that. Like everybody's like, "I'm gonna start a podcast," and you not only did it, but you made it all the way to 50 episodes, and I know you're gonna make it all the way to 100. And that is along with living your life and working full time, and everything else that you have going on in your life. Like that is just a badass feat. So congratulations. I'm so proud and I'm so honored. And then one last thing, I feel like this is a big outro, but I just gotta say it. When Danielle texted me, guys, to be on this episode, I was low key in the line for customs coming back from a vacation in Cancun, Mexico. And I glanced at my watch. I saw the text. I immediately dug my phone out of the bottom of my bag and said, yes, absolutely, whenever. I don't care. Like, book it. Like, we'll figure out the date. Like, I don't care what you want to talk about. I am there because I would do anything to support this woman. So, Danielle, so proud of you. And just truly, congratulations and good. Like, I'm just so proud of you for consistency that you have and for following up on doing what you said you were going to do. Like, that is just bomb. So, love it.
Thank you so much. I Yeah, that means a lot. Thank you. Um yeah, hopefully I can get through 50 more. I'm excited to see if people like the video thing. If people don't watch, then I'm not doing it for that long. But
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
it'll be
fair.
a lot, but I love watching like long form video, and I think that's becoming more popular. So I'm excited to see what the
Yeah.
next 50 episodes does. And I'm so grateful to you for being the very first person that was on the podcast to be here for number 50. Maybe you'll be back for number 100.
I was about to say, I'm not, no pressure, no pressure. If you find somebody cooler, like maybe we get Beyonce in the room, I don't know. Okay. But if you need somebody, as you know, I will move everything to make myself available for you.
I appreciate it. Um, I mean, I guess this will be a video, so people should like and subscribe. That's so I don't want to be that person.
That's
But yeah,
right. Like
do
and
all that.
I'll do it for you. Everybody make sure you like and subscribe. Please comment down below if you guys want to see more of this content. Why do I know that? Yes. Oh, and I did watch some YouTube videos yesterday. Turn on the notification bell so that you
Mm-hmm.
get a notification every time we upload a new video.
Exactly. And go follow Justin on Instagram at He's on Wheels. He's on hiatus right now, but be there so you can catch his great return.
I'll be back
Um,
soon ish.
and thank you so much, Justin. And I'll talk to y'all in a couple weeks. Bye.